complete telling you about finding that I was in this book, The Saints. I really was thrilled. As I said, Sarah came home and told me, and I just couldn't believe it. But then I noticed also that the editor on it was this young boy that I had taught earlier. And of course, I knew him really well from Mormon history. We would see each other all the time and go to a lot of the same meetings. And he knew my work, and I know his. I've got his books. He's just a remarkable young man with a PhD from some major school in the East. But anyhow, I decided, let me tell you one thing about the very this book that I was in initially that had the story of the Transfiguration. I'll see if I can find it, and that's where they picked it up for Journal of Mormon, for use in. You may have to cut this out. Pull this around. The original Opening the Heavens book is probably a pure current of the saints' history, because it starts around and tells, for instance, the four different stories, 4 to 6 different stories that Joseph Smith told about his initial father and son meeting, and what the difference was and why it was not. We find as we go through the different ones, they match completely, but they are different because he was talking to different groups. So that's the first chapter in here, showing all of those, and this goes on until and then it has the last chapter in it was after Joseph Smith's death. And there was a meeting by the Nauvoo Temple, and a lot of the people came there as they came to gather together after the death, not knowing what was going to happen to the church. Why, suddenly it appeared to many of the people that were there that Brigham Young, as he stood up, was he looked like Joseph Smith. He had his same voice. He had his same accents. He had his hands moved the same, and they were very, very certain that this had happened, and they would know that Brigham Young would be the next president of the church. This article was written by me, and I had been working on it for a number of years. I had reported on it to a Mormon History Association meeting, and I have to say that as I worked on it over the years and would go to the historical department and look and different places, they just seemed to kind of fall into place. It was amazing. One of the testimonies was by a woman by the name of Emily Smith Hoyt. And Emily Smith Hoyt was first cousin of Joseph Smith. And I remember the day I went over to the historical department, and I just started going through the film to see if I could find these mantle stories, and all of a sudden there was Emily's, and she told about it, that going to this meeting, and that she lived across the river, and could look down on Nauvoo, but she didn't actually live in Nauvoo. And she said she was such a good friend of Joseph's, and she was a good friend of Brigham Young's as well. But she went, after the death, she went to this particular meeting, and all of a sudden she heard her cousin's voice, Joseph Smith, and looked up, and she says, I saw Brigham, and I knew that it was Joseph, and then again, it was Brigham. And she later wrote this story down, her first cousin. Well, I'd seen it on microfiche, I might say during the 1930s, when there was the Depression and everything. For some reason or other, the church got involved in microfilming, in filming records all around the world. And in Europe, after the wars there, they would go into, after the Second World War, they went in there and they went to a lot of the churches and to the record repositories, and they would tell the people, if we can film your records, we'll give you a copy, and then we'll take one back with us. And this was all, when they took them back, they would save these records in the granite vault, which was a big cave in the mountains where they could keep these records and keep them clean and take care of them, preserve them. And at any rate, among the records that they had found was, I guess it was Emily's, and it was on film. Now they didn't at that time have the original, her original handwriting. They didn't have a copy of that book, that paper. But it looks like, as I look at the new saints, that the library has actually acquired that. The man that had that in his home didn't want to give it up at the time, but he allowed the church to film it. And so there was her wonderful, wonderful testimony. And it's so meaningful to me knowing that after Joseph's death, the Smith family kind of broke apart. But to see that his first cousin, who was almost the same age as he, wrote this magnificent testimony. And that testimony is the one that has been included in the Saints book, this first one, her testimony. And I am just thrilled because I wondered, after I found it, and I had it in this book, Opening the Heavens, no one had ever said anything about it. And I kind of wondered how come. To me, that was so meaningful that Joseph's first cousin had had that experience. At any rate, that's the one the saints have used. And as I said, I do think that they finally have acquired the original, her original document. At any rate, I was so excited about it, and I wanted to write to the editor of this book, Matthew J. Grove, who I had taught originally as a young boy, and who I associated with for so long in the Mormon History Association. At any rate, another thing that had come up recently during conference, this last conference, general conference, was it Ballard? Yes, it was Ballard, who talked about the vision of the redemption of the dead. And one of the articles that I had written about for the Journal of Mormon History was the fact that Lee, my husband, and the father of Sarah, and my boys, and the grandfather of people who might be interested in hearing this information. He had gone to World War I and had fought in Europe and France. He had actually been right at the same time. He was at Verdun. Verdun was the most horrifyingly horrible place where the war ended up in France and nearby where the peace was signed. And as soon as it did, he got permission to go to this horrible battleground covered with dead bodies, ditches filled with skeletons, gases, and all kinds of things coming up from the ground. And he actually was gassed there. But he helped the people after the war to begin to bury these bodies, these horrible bodies. And this grandfather of yours and our children, he came home. As soon as he came home, he married. He had a son, and then he went duck hunting, and he was killed. The gun went on in the back seat of his car, and the bullet went through his head. At the very same time that was happening, he was at Verdun in America. The president of the church, Joseph F. Smith, they couldn't hold conference or anything in Utah because they were going through the flu epidemic, the Spanish flu they called it. I don't know what kind of flu it was, but it's always called the Spanish flu when it was here in Europe. And so they had to close everything. They didn't have conference. And Joseph F. Smith was just so worried. He has 6 boys over in France fighting. And he was on his knees that time, and he received the vision of the redemption of the dead. Both things happening, Verdun and the vision at the same time, almost the same day. As I said, Leland's, who is Lee's father, had the same name, came home, married, and then 5 years later, he was shot and was dead. And I should mention that the president of the church, Joseph S. Smith, he also died on the 19th of November.